Today we are going to make a handle for a number 3 Hercules tool. It's got a 5/8 hole we're going to drill. We're going to start with marking the centers of our 17-inch blank of wood. Wood we are using today is a piece of maple. I'm going to use the centering tool here to mark the centers. And I have 2 divot points. I'm using a 5/8 brad point bit. It's got a nice pointed center to it, so I can line that hole right in my divots. And the blank is just loose here. No pressure applied to it. I'm going to hold my blank. And here is our hole being drilled. I'm using a spring-loaded spur drive and a cone center that will center up our blank into our pre-drilled hole. Going to be using the number 3 Hercules tool today. It's got a number 3 cutter. I'm going to line up my tool so it's on center. And I'm going to start roughing out the blank. I hold the tool level and flat. And I can also tip the tool on its edge and make a slicing cut. Okay, now that our tool blank is roughed out, I'm going to replicate a tool handle, and here's the shape that I like. So I'm going to mark my high and low spots. That's going to be my maximum diameter. And that's going to be my minimum diameter. And those measurements are truly based on your comfort. And that's going to be the end of my blank. On the tool end here, where the tool gets glued in, we're going to use a ferrule. In case you get a bad catch, the wood won't split. It'll help protect it. So we're using the large Hunter Tools ferrule. It's a steel ferrule, and the size of this ferrule is 1.125 inches. We have three sizes available. We have 7/8 for the small tools, 1 inch for our medium tools, and 1.125 inches for our large tools. I have a caliper. I put the ferrule on to help me keep the caliper in line. And that's a fit ferrule. So we're going to set that aside, and now we can finish making our handle. I am going to make a couple grooves where the ferrule gets glued on with epoxy, just to give a little bit extra holding. I have already marked the maximum diameter that I want my handle, and the minimum and the maximum, and now I just got to blend those together in a nice, smooth, comfortable shape. Raise the tool rest a little bit, so I'm cutting on center. Doing some roughing cuts with the tool held pretty flat. Getting a rough shape in here. Okay, now that I got my rough shape put in, now I'm going to do my finishing cuts. I'm going to increase my speed slightly, and I'm going to move my tool slower, and I'm going to kick the Hercules up on its corner, and I'm going to do a slicing bevel rubbing cut. I can do some shearing cuts with it. Smooth out some of my tool marks. I'm using my left hand against the tool rest to help stabilize my tool. Just using a bevel rubbing cut. And that's going to be our finished handle. We're just going to need to do a little bit of sanding. I'm going to turn my speed down a little bit. Start with my coarse grit sandpaper to get rid of any tool marks. And that's going to be our finished handle. Now I can cut the end off here. We can use any finish that you are comfortable with. I like to use an oil finish, and we'll get set up to to glue up the handle. Okay, so we have our sanded handle, which we started with an 80 grit sandpaper and we finished with 220 using grits 80 grit, 120 grit, 180 grit, and 220 grit. So we have our finished handle. We're going to put an oil finish on it, or you can use any finish that you like, polyurethane, lacquer. I like a Danish oil of some sort, tung oil. We're going to glue the number 3 Hercules tool to the shaft and the ferrule. I'm going to scuff up the inside of the ferrule slightly just to give the epoxy a little extra tooth. And I'm going to do the same thing with the number 3 Hercules tool just to give the epoxy a little bit more grit. I'm going to use a 2-part epoxy. I like a slow set epoxy. It's got a little bit stronger holding power, and it's got a little bit more working time. Mix out equal parts. And I'm going to thoroughly mix with the toothpick. Make sure your epoxy is thoroughly mixed so it cures completely. I'm going to test fit my ferrule. My ferrule fits pretty loose. If your ferrule's a little tight, you can use a rubber mallet to seat it a little bit more firmly. I'm going to just do a little light coat of epoxy. Twist and turn to get even coat. Wiping off any epoxy if there's any squeeze out. Put a little epoxy inside the hole. And I turn the tool to get even epoxy distribution. And if your tool is a little bit tight, again, using a rubber mallet. I like to line up the grain. The tool grain is stronger if the growth rings are going vertical versus horizontal. So I line up the tool so the cutter is on center and the grain is perfectly lined up straight. And all that's left is to cut off the end, put your finish of choice on it, and start making your projects. Thank you.